It was an ordinary clear day at one of the city's construction sites, and work was in full swing. One of the workers, a young dark-haired man named Tony, received a message on his phone. It said that he had failed the selection process again at one of the companies, and it turned out that he had the expertise in the right area, but they had restrictions on hiring employees, so he couldn't pass the interview. At that moment, someone called out to Tony, forcing him to close his phone. It turned out it was his partner, John, who asked if Tony was playing mobile games again instead of working. Tony quickly hid his phone and assumed a harmless appearance, saying that he had already finished his work and now had nothing to do. John asked him incredulously why a guy who had only been on the team for a year was doing so well. But she didn't tell him that she had been doing this since he graduated from high school, which he had told him when they were sitting at the bar. He chuckled, saying that John's memory was knocked out of him every time he drank. The man was not very happy with this answer. Then Tony climbed up on a stepladder and started painting the walls, saying that John could rest and have a smoke while he finished everything. At that moment, Tony's body was pierced by a terrible, strange sensation. John noticed it and asked what happened to him. Tony immediately grabbed his back, but said that he was fine. But despite this, his whole body continued to shake. He thought to himself that his painkillers must have worn off. As it turned out, due to the hard work, his back began to hurt very badly. The pain became more frequent after he lifted the panel 6 months ago. After some time, evening came. The men left the construction site, and at that moment, one of the elders, Stephen, approached them. He asked why Tony was doing all the work here. He turned to John. The man was extremely unhappy that his partner, Tony, was doing all the work for him. Then John asked his boss why he liked Tony so much. The man said that he is the only one who tries to get everything done on time, which is why he likes him, while John does not listen to him at all. Then the boss approached Tony and asked how his back was. The guy said that he was fine and thanked the man for his concern. Stephen asked if he was taking on too much responsibility, to which Tony hesitated a little and said that apparently he did take on too much work. He then asked him if he wanted to go for a drink with them, but the guy replied that he needed to go to the hospital because his painkillers had run out, so Stephen said goodbye to him and wished him a good journey. Soon after, Tony got into a taxi and went about his business. While he was driving in the car, he thought about his life. He thought that he would not be able to work until he took the pills. He would like to find a less stressful position where he could feel physically good. However, even after a bunch of applications, not a single company accepted it. Sometime later, Tony arrived at the hospital, where he continued to think about why he was so unlucky. He thought about the fact that he was not being accepted because he was only applying for administrative positions. He was afraid that because of his back, he would no longer be able to bear heavy loads. Soon the doctor, whose name was Hank, took him in. As soon as he touched his back, Tony yelped in pain and tears poured out of his eyes. The man said that the intervertebral disc between the fourth and fifth vertebrae had worn out, and Tony could no longer lift heavy objects. The guy did not object, saying that without work he would simply die of hunger, but the doctor said that he had already told him about this many times. He asked if Tony didn't want to repeat his father's fate. Then, before the boy's eyes, terrible memories were brought again, 13 years ago. During a change of settings, his father died in an accident. That day, his father was working at a height and suddenly fell. The company shifted the blame to the contractor, and its president suddenly disappeared. Thanks to lawyers, they were able to receive compensation of 25 million won, and their family has been in a state of survival ever since. Stephen asked him what he would do if his mother found out about everything, and asked Tony to think again, because painkillers are temporary, and his spine is not eternal. The young man said that it was very difficult for him to find a position with such high pay. The doctor said that in that case he had nothing more to add. Then he suddenly shouted at him, saying that if he was going to continue like this, he might as well not come to him anymore. He asked the nurse to take him out and said that with this attitude, he was not going to see him in his office anymore. When Tony left the office, Hank picked up his phone and opened the banking app, then transferred 2 million won to a woman named Hannah. Then he leaned back in his chair, sighed, and thought to himself that Hannah's life had gone downhill after she met her husband. Tony soon arrived at another hospital, where his mother, Hannah, was lying in one of the rooms. He sat down next to her bed, thinking to himself that he was a real idiot. He then asked the woman if it was painful for her to go through all these procedures. Hannah said that she was fine and didn't want her son to worry, and then she asked him if he was the one who sent her the money recently, adding that she was fine and didn't need that amount of money. When Tony asked her what money, she showed him her phone screen, which showed an incoming transfer of 2 million won. The guy didn't know what to answer. He didn't understand who made this transfer. He suspected that it could have been the construction manager, the foreman, or Uncle Hank. Then Hannah asked her son how he was doing in the company, to which the boy replied that it was not difficult for him at all. He was doing quite well, even though he only finished school. The woman sighed, saying that she was very sorry that her son was having a hard time and that she could not even support him because of her illness. Then, Tony suggested that she sleep, seeing that she was already quite tired, to which Hannah replied that she really did get tired very quickly lately. But now her son was next to her, and she couldn't just go and fall asleep. Tony said that he would be with her and she could rest. Then he took her hand, and then the woman agreed to get some sleep. After a while, she discovered that Tony had fallen asleep on the bench near her bed. Then she got up from her bunk and covered him with her blanket. She thought to herself that her son was completely stupid. He smelled the same as his father did when he was still alive, the smell of someone working on a construction site, so she couldn't help but notice what he had been doing all this time. She promised herself that she would definitely overcome the disease and help her son, who now, unfortunately, was trying to do everything alone, for which she was immensely grateful to him. Soon, a new day dawned, and Tony returned to the construction site. Some of the workers were already sitting in one of the workrooms. The gray-haired man, who was one of the bosses, noticed two guys approaching the building. It was Tony and John. The hero greeted Kevin, his boss, and he asked what happened to John, had he not washed himself. The man said he had a little to drink yesterday, so Kevin told him to get to work as soon as he got himself together. He said that if they saw any Elsung group workers today, they should avoid them. He then turned to Tony and asked him to bring him a cup of coffee with 1 spoon of sugar. When they sat down at the table, he asked the guy how he felt. He replied that everything was the same, but he was only getting worse. Then Kevin asked him if he wanted to become a carpenter. They really missed them. He said that in that case, instead of 110,000 won, he would receive 150,000 won. Tony replied that he didn't mind, but he was afraid that his back wouldn't be able to take it. Kevin praised him, said that he would work until the end of his career and really appreciated this quality in him. Tony thought about how that money clearly wasn't from his boss. Then he thought about how hard it was for him to work. But he knew what he was doing, walking around and causing him pain and discomfort. And now there is some unknown person who is sending money to his mother. Then he decided to call Uncle Hank. He thanked him for his help, saying that he had guessed that it was he who had sent his mother the money. He said that he would definitely repay him for his kindness. And then Stephen asked if he had really never left the construction site. When the doctor realized that the guy was still working there, he yelled at him, telling him to finally listen to him and quit. After that, he hung up the phone. And at that moment, Tony's back was again pierced by pain. The guy was upset that his uncle was constantly lecturing him. At that moment, a strange message appeared on his phone. He was extremely surprised by what he saw there. It was exactly what he expected after 200 refusals. The message stated that Elsung congratulated Tony on making it to the second round of interviews, and they were expecting him in the office in a few days. At that moment, some strange blue screen appeared in front of the young man. When he looked up, he saw that there was a strange inscription written on the screen, which said that his wish had come true. The hero did not understand how to react to all this. He reached his fingers towards the screen, but his hand just passed through it. The guy didn't understand why this screen didn't disappear and why he could see things like this. He suspected that he was starting to go crazy. Then suddenly the system informed him that he had joined the Elsung employee course and asked him if he wanted to start training. At that moment, he approached one of the workers and asked him for a favor. The man thought that he just wanted to ask him for a cigarette. He pointed ahead and asked if he could see the sign hovering above him. Then the man suddenly screamed, asking if he had gone crazy or if he had simply had a drink somewhere since early morning. Tony quickly apologized to him and left. Why did he run inside the building? He realized that no one could see this thing. He understood why the man reacted that way, because he would also be taken aback if someone talked to him about such a thing, because he really is the only one who can see this nonsense. Then he went into the restroom and stood in front of the mirror. The screen was not reflected in the reflection either, but it was still hanging over him. Tony thought that this was complete madness. He assumed that he was just dreaming all this. He wanted to get into this company, but this strange training was something incomprehensible. He saw it in TV series, but it was still difficult for him to accept what was happening to him. All this, however, becoming a part of a large company was his dream. Then he decided that he would undergo this training, no matter what it cost him. The system told him that if he gave up halfway through, he would lose his memories of the course. But Tony was determined. He said he was willing to take the risk. And then the system told him that as a reward he would get a job and gave him a skill called Potential Employee View. When Tony moved away from the mirror, he realized that everything was swimming before his eyes. While he was trying to come to his senses, The system informed him that the skill assessment and work efficiency skill allows you to identify possible problems with prolonged use. A debuff called unsuitability appears. So Tony should only use this skill when necessary. After some time, the hero went to the bookstore, still thinking that he did not understand how such a skill could affect the environment. Then he decided that by using this ability he would be able to see something, and after that, he approached the stand with books. He closed his eyes, preparing himself to use the skill, and soon decided to try it. He opened his eyes, mentally trying to activate the gaze of a potential employee. However, the longer he looked at the books, the more clearly he realized that nothing special was happening. Soon the system appeared in front of him again. It said that this skill was only available in the buildings of the Elsung Group company. Then he shouted out loud, saying that this system had too many demands. He ended up buying a bunch of books from that store. However, before unpacking them, he went to a construction site to test his skill. When he opened it, he saw that in 2 of the 12 books, some paragraphs were glowing bright green. He returned the rest of the books back to the store, and those books that had notes he read all night long. Soon the day of the interview arrived, and Tony opened his closet to find some clothes suitable for the day. The system told him that the best choice would be a neat classic suit. The hero was shaking, but he understood that the main thing in such a situation was not to get nervous. Soon he went outside. It was a pleasant sunny day outside. The hero sat down at the bus stop and continued reading the book, which had notes in it. He continued reading it even while on the bus. While the constant pop-up messages irritated him, on the other hand, he realized that they weren't helping him much. Soon, one of the company's employees informed him that the interview room was on the 2nd floor. However, Tony suddenly heard the company workers, a man and a woman, quietly talking to each other behind him. The woman told him that this guy has 90, 80, 61, which is excellent. The system informed him that he had passed the appearance assessment. Tony sighed resignedly, saying that the general information about the interview stated that appearance did not matter. Elsung Group gave free rein to the applicants, but at the same time carefully assessed their every step. The company held a significant position in each of the areas, including fashion, logistics, real estate, tourism, etc., and was frightening in its scale. Soon Tony and the other candidates went to the interview room, where they took their places and had to take the test. Many of those present were very nervous, not knowing how to answer the questions. There is a big difference between those who know the answers to questions and those who don't. At least in this respect, Tony had an advantage. Soon, men and women entered the office. The girl introduced herself as Kimberly, saying that she joined the company in 2017 and would be assessing skills today. The man's name was Connor. He said that he had been working for the company since 2014 and would be helping candidates with testing. They knew that some of the candidates had traveled from far away, so they asked if anyone had had any inconveniences on their way to the interview. Then one of the candidates raised her hand. She wanted to ask something. She said that she had come from afar, and then added that in many companies all travel expenses are covered by the employer, so she would like to know if their company pays for the trip. Tony didn't think to himself that no company would want to hire a candidate with that attitude. The next moment, the system informed them that the girl, who was a potential employee, had been excluded. He then realized that he needed to continue recording his results, but he thought that the test had 200 questions, and he wondered if he needed to solve them all or if he should make a few mistakes. There was half an hour allotted for 200 questions, and soon Tony realized that he had a minute left. He decided that he did not have to do the entire test. He did not know who gave him this ability, but he decided that it would be a sin not to use it. He must do everything in his power. When the test was over, he went to one of the establishments to meet his colleagues from the construction site. Then Stephen asked him why he didn't come to work yesterday. Since Tony never missed a day of work, Stephen assumed he had a girlfriend, so he suggested that he take her somewhere decent. Tony apologized and thought to himself that if he said that he had gone to an interview at a large company, he would be considered a rat. Stephen laughed, saying he was just a young guy, and then added that he now realized where he was spending all his hard-earned money. Tony didn't think about the fact that he had become very close with the foreman and the others, and if it weren't for his back, he would have continued working there. At that moment, the blue screen appeared in front of him again. The system recommended that he be prepared for the results of the interview. The system said that there was a specific task related to the interview. The general task required him to prepare for the final interview. He was waiting for an interview, during which he would have to answer the director's questions. Tony was a little angry. He couldn't believe that the system was offering him a meeting with the director himself. But the punishment for not showing up was a change of construction site. Stephen was distracted from his dinner by the sound of his cell phone. As it turned out, It was his boss, Kevin, who was calling him. He asked him to arrange a meeting for him and Tony. Steven said he would send a guy to him right away. He then turned to Tony, saying that the boss wanted to talk to him. He smiled, asking what was wrong, since Tony didn't look surprised at all. Tony sighed, saying that his boss was paying him, so there was no point in avoiding him. He then left the establishment, realizing that he needed to meet and talk to the boss. Soon, Tony came to the construction site. The atmosphere between him and Kevin was quite tense. The man then said that he had tried his best, and so tomorrow Tony would work as a carpenter for the foreman. The hero asked him why he made such a sudden decision. Then Kevin screamed, asking where else he could find someone like Tony. He asked him what he would do without the carpenter. Then the hero replied that he was fine with it. Kevin said he would find someone who could paint the walls, but finding a carpenter was not so easy. He couldn't lose someone like Tony. The hero was very annoyed by the fact that the boss shouted at him for so long, it was impossible to talk. At this point, the system told him that he had a side quest open. He needed to listen to the boss's story to the end, since the boss considered him a good person. The hero was not very happy with this task, but he had no choice. He turned to Kevin, asking him to be a little quieter. He said that he would listen to him, and then he himself would need to tell his boss something. Then Kevin said that now that he didn't have a second carpenter, he couldn't complete the construction plan. Because of this, he loses millions of won a day. Then he shouted again, saying that Tony couldn't leave. The hero thought about it. He was only guessing, but in his opinion, it was 100% his fault. He decided he had to back off, so Kevin asked him to help him for at least a week. Tony was reluctant to agree, but decided that he would help him, but only for a week. Kevin immediately became happy and thanked him, saying that he was trying to take care of him. He thanked the guy for coming to him. Then he said that this was the only time he asked him for something like this. He took his phone out of his pocket and called the president, saying that everything was decided and he would be able to complete the plan in a week. Within 7 days, they would finish the construction. Soon evening came and the workers asked the boss how everything went, and he said that everything was great. Soon 2 men approached Tony. One of them was his boss, Steven, and next to him stood a man he didn't know. Steven asked him to come down, telling him to say hello to the director of the Elsung group. Tony did not get down from the stepladder and shook the man's hand, saying that this was their first meeting. The director said that his name was Charlie. He began to worry when he learned that the construction plan was in jeopardy and thanked Tony again for his help. And although the hero grinned, saying that he was glad to help, he thought to himself that he was only here for a week since his back was already starting to give out. Then Charlie said that he was going to the office the day after tomorrow, and since this was his last time there, he offered the men a drink. However, Tony looked away in embarrassment, saying that he couldn't go because he had a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. After work, he went back to the hospital to see Uncle Hank. As soon as he left for the office, everyone else in the hospital heard a terrifying scream. The doctor tried to fix his back, but the situation was already so dire that any touch was accompanied by incredible pain for Tony. Then he told him to go to the second floor for physical therapy. Tony's eyes filled with tears of pain. He was very worried about the fact that he had an interview coming up, and the doctor continued to reproach him for not caring about his health at all. The next day, Tony nevertheless came to the Elsung group for an interview. He and 2 other candidates appeared before the directors, and the hero introduced himself by saying that his name was Tony. When he looked up, he saw a familiar man standing in front of him. It was Charlie, the same company director he had met the previous evening. Charlie chuckled, saying that this was not the first time they had met, and so the guy could sit down. Once all the candidates had taken their seats, the directors decided to begin the interviews. Charlie volunteered to go first, and the others present followed suit. Then he turned to a man, one of the candidates, and asked him to stand up. He noticed how the man was dressed. He was wearing white socks with black pants. Then he asked him what he thought about his appearance. The candidate replied that it seemed like these clothes didn't go together very well. Tony wondered if the system was warning him that the pressure would be high at this stage. Then Charlie asked him why he still wore those clothes, since he himself thought that they didn't look very good. Tony realized that the atmosphere in the room was now causing great discomfort to the candidates. This atmosphere brings out all their hidden traits. The candidate couldn't answer Charlie's question, so the man asked him why he was silent, if he couldn't control his emotions. Tony understood that the first thing he needed to do in such a situation was to calm down. This interview was testing his restraint and ability to control his emotions, so he needed to accept it. Seeing the confusion on the candidate's face, Charlie sighed in displeasure. The man was too stressed to get a word out. He was unable to handle the situation. And when everyone realized this, Charlie asked him to sit down and began interviewing the next candidate. It soon became clear that the girl had no experience in social work, and although she tried to justify herself by saying that she had been studying all this time, Charlie said that this was not what their company needed. When he asked her how she was going to work with clients, tears came to her eyes and the girl didn't know what to answer. Soon the girl's interview also ended. She left the room in tears. Tony realized that director Charlie had asked the question first to throw everyone off track, because the rest of the questions required mental preparation. Soon it was Tony's turn. He stood up from his chair and proudly introduced himself. The hero had no intention of leaving here empty-handed. Then Charlie asked him what his education was. The hero replied that he was a banking specialist, but Charlie knew that he had not attended university. Tony said that he really didn't have a college education. Then Charlie asked him if he wanted to say anything else. The hero thought that if he blurted out something wrong, he would be crossed off the list of candidates, so he decided to be honest. He knew he had to get their attention, so he said he needed to make money. Charlie said that they were doing the same thing, and he had come here for the same reason. But he asked why he had chosen to work instead of going to university. Tony said he didn't regret his decision one bit. Instead of studying, he went to work at a construction site, and in the evenings he spent all his free time on self-education. He said he never neglected it. He may not have gone to college like everyone else, but he earned his engineering qualifications through online courses. He tried to compensate for the lack of a university in every way possible, and the result was that he was able to obtain an education in the economic field. Charlie was very surprised by this answer. He turned to look at his colleagues and smiled, saying that it was wonderful. Thus, his part of the interview was finished and he handed the floor over to his colleagues. The man asked the hero what he could do for their company. Tony knew it was a difficult question for the average person, but he was ready for it. The reason he wants to work here is because the job is not too stressful and the pay is good. This way he can pay his mother's hospital bills and not have to worry about what he will eat or his health. He will be free. Then he said that as long as it does not contradict the laws and norms of society, he is ready to do anything. Then the man asked him why he had put forward such conditions. Tony said that otherwise the image and future of the company that gives him the order will be destroyed. He supports the honesty of the company and its contribution to the development of the country. Only by fulfilling these conditions will Elsung Group move in the right direction in accordance with its goals. The hero knew that this was not the perfect answer. He just had to convince them that there was no such thing as a perfect answer, because this interview was designed to see how people behaved in stressful situations. The man then decided to ask him the next question, asking if he had a girlfriend. Tony said he doesn't have a girlfriend. It just so happens that there are practically no women around him. He said that if the man had someone suitable, he would be happy to meet this girl, to which Charlie laughed. He then reported that Tony had done an excellent job in the interview. He said that the interview was over and all candidates could go. Soon evening came and Tony returned to the construction site. Steven approached him, surprised that the guy had come here. He waved his hand and said that he had a lot of work to do in the control room today. He noticed that Tony looked a little strange, so he asked him what was wrong. The hero wanted to tell him what was really going on, but at that moment their conversation was interrupted by a strange sound. As it turned out, John decided to approach them, but he tripped over a beam and fell. The hero thought about the fact that John was in trouble again, but he had too much work to worry about such things. Then, Steven said that they were having dinner together that day and invited Tony to go with them. However, the hero said that he would like to talk to the boss. Steven, like everyone else, was curious about what they wanted to tell Tony. Then the guy said that he was finishing his last week here, which really surprised the men. At that moment, the system sent him a new task. He needed to attend the evening and listen to stories. There was no reward or penalty for refusal, which was extremely surprising for the system's orders. Then Tony asked the boss what they were having for dinner. Steven chuckled and said that they were having soup today. Then Tony said that if the boss fed him beef, he would switch to the manager's side. John and his partner were very pleased that Tony had made this decision. Moreover, they also wanted to taste the meat. Steven tried to look displeased, saying that he would only agree to it because everyone asked. Soon the men arrived at the establishment and decided to drink to such a good day. Steven said that this week had been very difficult. Lately, people are becoming less and less willing to become engineers. His brother is a gas worker, and he himself worked in his specialty for 20 years. He didn't understand what the point of studying was if it was so difficult to earn good money, so he decided not to study further, considering it useless. John said that this is all for a reason. The manager says this because he is already too old. At that moment, Tony thought about the fact that, even when drunk, he doesn't talk nonsense, and the technical staff finds this very difficult. Nowadays, Industry is driven by science, technology, and pharmaceuticals. When everyone was so drunk that they couldn't think clearly, the hero turned to the window and began to look out at the city at night. A whole week has passed since that evening. Tony was at the Elsung group when his boss called him and asked why he hadn't shown up for work. Then Tony said that yesterday he had talked about taking the day off because he needed rest. However, Steven insisted. He asked Tony to come to work, as he had not slept all night and did not want to work alone. However, Tony said that he would not be able to go out and would not come tomorrow. And before the manager could answer, he hung up. At that moment, one of the company's employees approached him and said that she would take him to the debate site. She said that the second interview is a discussion between 10 people. Tony can enter into the discussion according to the words of the speaker. The topic of the panel discussion is OECD countries, where South Korea is part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Today, they will discuss the issue of high prices for education and ways to solve this problem. When all the candidates arrived in the room, the host announced that when answering they should raise their hand, state their number and name, and only then speak. Tony then realized that this was exactly what he had been worried about. Since this topic required a broad background in social work, he mentally thanked the group leader for the invaluable experience. Soon the man leading the debate made notes on his tablet and said they needed to begin. Tony looked up confidently, preparing for the group interview. He was assigned number 2. Soon the discussion began, and number 3 entered the debate, raising his hand and saying that he believed that the economic situation of recent years had had a serious impact on the country. As a result, the cost of education has increased greatly, and in order to be among the top 10 economically strongest countries, they must not skimp on human resources. If the cost of education is reduced, they will be able to provide more talented people. Tony looked at him in surprise, thinking that this guy was a real idiot. All the discussions had already been given the topic of the reasons for the increase in tuition fees and ways to solve this problem. And this guy just repeated the question and did not give any answer. He thought it was a good thing he had decided not to answer first, since now he had time to think about his answer. The discussion soon turned to participant number 7, who said that her parents spent 300 million won to provide her with a good education, and that such amounts lead to a decrease in the birth rate, since not every parent can spend that much on several children, and she believed that it was necessary to encourage an increase in the population and increase payments to families with children. Number 3 agreed with her, saying that families were breaking up, the birth rate was falling, the cost of education was rising every year, and encouraging more children was a great way out. Tony thought that this sounded good, but the company had nothing to do with it, since it was not a government enterprise, so they did not have to worry about such issues. Then he raised his hand, suggesting that the situation be looked at from a different angle. With this statement, he greatly surprised speakers number 3 and 7. Tony said their country ranks first in the world in terms of the cost of education and second in terms of the number of applicants. Then he stood up from his seat and went to the board, saying that they should talk about the quality of education. He asked everyone present to look at the OECD education rankings. The quality of the education system is ranked 75th. From a young age, they have the choice to continue their education after school or not. Compared to Germany, where education is compulsory, they have the right to choose where to go to study, be it college, university, or self-education. As a result, the number of jobs fully corresponds to demand. And although the average salary there is higher than in Korea, the difference in incomes in different specialties is not so great. However, their country has a personnel imbalance, with insufficient support for areas such as science, IT, and other technologies, and most engineering positions being filled by foreign workers. Tony believed that if their education system became more streamlined like Germany's, it would bear fruit. It would reduce the cost of education in the country and help its development as a whole. When he looked at the other debaters, he saw the doubt in their eyes and realized that they were confused by the way he connected these facts. Then participant number 10 asked if he really thought so. It seemed to him that participant number 2 was dissatisfied with the education system in their country. Tony was extremely surprised by such a statement on his part. He didn't expect that there would be an open attack here, but he understood that the main thing in such situations was not to panic. He then apologized if he had offended anyone, saying that his intention was not to slander their country. Participant number 10 said that he really didn't like his words. The foreign education system does not take into account the traditions of their country, and he thinks that introducing something like this is a huge mistake. They have enough outstanding and talented people. Everyone here had been educated in Seoul or abroad, and they were sitting here only because of their knowledge, but he didn't understand why number 2 thought they were worse than the Germans. The debate leader then turned to debater number 10 and asked his name. The man replied that his name was Ian. The manager then thanked him for his participation, saying that he could go free. When he heard this, his face turned red, either from misunderstanding or from anger. The manager said that he did not think he was suitable for working in their company, but he thanked him for his good work. Tony thought about how companies nowadays need talent that can integrate into a team, and this Ian puts others down, thinking himself superior given the company's demands. He is the worst of all that could come across. There is no point in hiring someone who wants to be in the center, pushing out everyone else. After this, Ian left the room, slamming the door loudly behind him. Then, the manager said that they had a second topic, dedicated to national pension reform. The debaters discussed this topic a lot, and the hero began to think that this would never end. 25 minutes passed, and they still had a disagreement of opinions that was not being resolved. He wanted all this to end as soon as possible. Judging by the examiner's face, he was also fed up with all this. Then Tony decided to speak up, saying that at this rate they would not be able to come to a consensus, but that, summing up each speech, 2 prevailing views could be identified. Participant number 1 said that the national and occupational pension should be integrated, following the example of Japan, and participant number 6 responded that the shortcoming of the national pension could be supplemented by private payments. Then he suggested listening to one more person and summing up the results by voting. The examiner noted to himself that there was a heated discussion going on within the group, but this guy was silent. Typically, people like him act as mediators in disputes, and that's exactly the kind of person their company needs. Soon, he thanked all the participants for their work and said that they were finished for the day. After everyone left, he made a note next to Tony's name, saying that this guy had definitely done it. When the hero left the office, he heard someone screaming. The man was talking about how he had been treated unfairly. When he turned around, he saw that participant number 10 was arguing with the examiner, saying that he was kicked out unfairly. Then the hero realized that there were even those here who did not admit their mistake. When the hero blinked, he saw that the examiner seemed to be covered in a green aura. Tony didn't understand why his skill was activated. Now every person looked completely different in his eyes. He looked back to see the rest of the people in the hallway. Behind him stood a man and a woman. The woman had an orange aura and the man had a yellow one. Today's interview was useful. He learned something new. Firstly, if you blink 3 times in a row, it activates automatically. Secondly, each color is specific to a certain person. It can be red, orange, or green. He assumed that the red ones were people under 20, the orange ones were people over 20, and the green ones were people over 30, but he doubted that they were divided by age. After some time, the hero returned to his job at the construction site. While he was busy working, a new message came on his phone. It said that he had passed an interview at the Elsung Group. The last interview with the directors would take place tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the company's main building. The hero was extremely happy with this news. He was happy that the day of the last interview would finally come, but he understood that vigilance would not hurt him. He decided that he had to remain calm and had to pass the final interview to fulfill his dream. After that, he approached John and decided to give him some advice, saying that he was putting too much paint on the roller, thus it would run out faster. However, the guy didn't hear him and again took a huge amount of paint and then directed it upward to paint the walls. When Tony looked up, he saw a huge amount of paint flying right onto his face. All this paint ended up on his head. John immediately climbed down from the stepladder, apologizing to his partner. And although Tony was very unhappy, he said that he shouldn't worry about such trifles. John continued to change, saying that he was very sorry, but the hero calmed him down, saying that he was okay. He then headed towards the showers and met his supervisor, Steven, on the way. The man asked him what happened, to which the hero replied that it was nothing special, just work-related issues, and said that he would go to the dorm to wash up. Steven said it was far, so he should go to the bathhouse on the first floor. It was opening today. Tony had no doubt. He was sure of how the other workers had reacted to this. But Steven said that they themselves had sent word that everyone should come in and wash up after work today, so there would be no misunderstanding. Then the hero went down the stairs to wash off the paint. He felt very comfortable walking around with his hair stuck together. Soon he arrived at the right door. When he entered, he immediately took off all his dirty clothes and headed to the shower. After that, he took a hot shower, washing off all the paint. Then he went a little to the middle, where there was already a man. He asked him what he was doing. Tony told him that he was a construction worker. The man suggested that this must be very hard work, since he came here covered in paint from head to toe. Then the hero smiled and asked if this man was really the boss here. When the man answered him that he was indeed the boss, the hero immediately became delighted, saying that his bathhouse was simply something. It was a wonderful job, and then asked if he was paid well. The man said that he was paid enough not to envy others. Then the hero thanked him again for his efforts. After this, the man suddenly dove under the water. Tony panicked, thinking that the man had suddenly become ill and drowned. He immediately rushed to his aid, intending to pull him out from under the water. At that moment, the man emerged and laughed, asking if he really thought he was dead. Then, he said that he actually had a curse on him. He said that in the bathhouse he always has to press, especially after he sweats a lot. Tony said it was very interesting, and thought to himself that he was doing the right thing. You can't identify possible inconveniences for customers without testing it yourself. He said that the man was an excellent specialist in his field and looked very healthy, to which his friend told him that he too should take care of his health, not forgetting to exercise and eat well while he was still young. Then he suddenly stood up, saying that it was time for him to go. Tony wished him luck and health, saying that he hoped that everything would be fine for him. The man smiled and said that he also hoped that everything would be fine for the guy. When Tony left the bathhouse, a man in a suit followed him in. He headed straight inside the bathhouse. Once inside, he called out to the president, who turned out to be the same man. He said the closing ceremony was in 40 minutes and asked if he would go to it. As it turns out, President Christopher really did have a curse after the construction. If he didn't take a bath here, an accident would definitely happen within a year. The man hoped that everything would be fine this year. Soon the day of the final interview arrived. The hero tried to be as calm and collected as possible. The system informed him that all he had to do was pass the final interview. But Tony was unhappy, saying that it was not that easy. When the system told him that he just had to trust, he sighed with displeasure, saying that since it wasn't going to help, he would do everything himself. He needed to remember everything, from the company's past to the events of today. He soon accepted the company and greeted everyone present, thanking them for giving him a chance. Then the committee chairman asked Tony to sit down. The hero thought about the fact that the system told him not to worry, but at a meeting with directors and luck will not work. Then he decided it was time to put the skill to use. When he looked at the directors, he saw that one of them was emitting a blue aura and the other one was emitting a purple aura. They all looked to be over 50 years old. He doubted that they were really directors. Then the only man said that Tony had applied for a management position related to credit and banking. The man approached another principal, saying that this guy had not attended college or university. Then he asked how he was able to get an education himself. The man said that this guy must be very good to have made it this far, and asked the assistant to give him the results of past interviews. Soon, all the directors saw that Tony had received top marks in the interview. They were extremely surprised that he did better than graduates from the country's most popular universities. Then the assistant leaned over to one of the directors and said he thought this guy could be classified as an SSS. This group usually includes relatives and descendants of the chairman's family or ordinary mortals who have reached their level. The director then turned to Tony and asked him what kind of job he would like to do. The hero said that he would prefer an office job, but whatever activity they assigned him, he would be happy. When the director said that Tony couldn't go, why, the hero was extremely surprised. Then the director said that the interview was over and thanked the guy for his work. When he came out, they began to discuss whether he could be a relative of the chairman or someone from his entourage, and decided to thoroughly check this information. One of the directors suggested that he had been deliberately disguised as an ordinary economist so that they would not suspect anything. Another man agreed with him, saying that the chairman's policy was precisely to start from the very bottom. It was all too suspicious because the HR department noticed it first. They shouldn't make mistakes either. They assumed that a person from the SSS group had come to them. The story moves to an expensive building. A young man came to the office of his father, who was extremely unhappy that his son decided to show up after so much time. He said that he had failed. Although he had prepared for so long, such shame had never happened in their family. The young man said he was very sorry and asked his father to give him another chance. When the man started yelling at him, saying that he had not shown up for the interview and had failed, the young man clenched his fists in anger. The man then turned again to his son, named Tony, and told him to speak to him openly and not hide anything. The story moves back to the construction site. It was another one of Tony's working days. He received another message on his phone, which said that he had been accepted for a position at Elsung Group. The hero knew that it would not be easy to pass the interview with the directors, and he had a feeling that it was a waste of time. He then received another message saying that he needed to attend a mandatory medical examination at the regional hospital. but that he could also provide medical reports from another hospital. The hero didn't know what to do. He wanted to get a job in the company because of his back, but now he doubted that this would not become a hindrance. Then he decided to go to the hospital to see Uncle Hank. When he entered the office, the doctor asked if his back was hurting again. Tony scratched the back of his head and said that he was fine today. He said he had passed a final interview for a position in a large company. Hank was very happy for him, saying that now he would finally not be putting unnecessary strain on his spine. However, he had a feeling that something was wrong here. Then Tony lowered his head in shame and said that it was nonsense. He understood that he could only ask his uncle about it, but he could not utter a word. Then he said he wanted him to write him a prescription for painkillers. Hank said he guessed that was the reason the guy came there. When he looked at him, he realized that Tony had a very sad look, which surprised the man since he usually had a very confident attitude. He didn't understand what the problem was. He remembered Tony's words about him passing the final interview at a large company. Then the doctor thought that since he was going to get a job, he needed to get a medical examination. And then he realized what this guy wanted from him. He understood that if he was caught, his license would easily be revoked. However, Hank suddenly started typing something on his computer, thinking that this guy was just like his father, making everyone worry about him. Soon after, the hero went downstairs to get a prescription from the nurse, and then she handed him something else. As it turned out, it was a disc. At that moment, the hero heard Hank's voice from behind him, and he decided to congratulate him once again. He said that the guy would pay for his medications as soon as he received his first salary. Tony smiled, realizing that his uncle had helped him a lot. Soon the hero went back home. He received another message from the company, which said that he had passed the general selection of personnel at Elsung Group. The hero understood that he survived only thanks to his uncle's help, and this made him feel very good. At that moment, the system window appeared above his head again, informing him that Tony had access to the employee store and that his current balance was 5 points. The system reported that the store is a great tool that will help solve problems that arise during work. You can buy special items for points that he will earn by completing tasks. When a window appeared in front of the hero allowing him to open a store for employees, he immediately agreed. Soon the system window increased. Among the goods for new employees was a sobering pill that instantly removes alcohol from the body, lenses of vision through walls, allowing to see through walls in a radius of 2 meters for 1 minute, a candy that stops drowsiness when taken for 6 hours. It removes signs of drowsiness, as well as a charming aroma that will make the owner attractive. For the opposite sex, the effect increases twofold. Tony couldn't believe his eyes. It seemed to him that it was all a game or some kind of magic. The system then asked him if he wanted to lose his memory, and the hero hastened to explain that he didn't mean that. The system said it existed for him to succeed, and he refused it. So Tony apologized for expressing himself incorrectly and asked the system not to take it too seriously. Then, the system said that it understood the user's words, but in the third one, you need to be more careful. And this statement made Tony very angry. Why did the system give him a quest in which he had to talk to his mother, calm her down by telling her that he had found a job in a new company? As a reward, he would receive 6 points, and also open a side quest. As a punishment, the side quest would remain closed. The hero thought about the fact that even if it weren't for the system, he was still going to go to his mother, which he did in the near future. He came to her room and knocked on the door. When Hannah realized that her son had arrived, she smiled. She said she was feeling better, so her son had nothing to worry about. Then Tony decided to tell her that he had been accepted to work at Elsung Group. Hannah was very happy, saying that it was great news. Then the guy said that in that case she needed to get better, and they would go home together. Then Hannah said that her aunt had bought and brought her a whole box of apples that day, and she offered to take a few for her son. Tony was pleased to see his mother finally smiling. The woman said that her son studied hard and got a position in a good company, so she is very happy for him. Then Tony stood up and said he was going to go to the nurse for a stroller. He asked his mother to wait for him and went into the corridor. When he left the room, the system informed him that the quest had been completed. She then informed him that Hank was very worried about his mother, so Tony should call him and ask him to come to the hospital. He would get 5 points and there would be no punishment. When the hero saw the name of the quest, which was called First Love, he was shocked. He did not understand what the system wanted to say with this because Hank was his father's best friend. His father and Uncle Hank were best friends when they were young. He was the same friend who came and scolded his father every time for not taking care of his health. Tony remembered these moments from his childhood well. Now the hero realized that all this time Hank was not married. He still couldn't get over the fact that his father's best friend was in love with his mother. Then he turned to the system, asking if all this was true, to which the system replied that it could not lie. The hero then asked her why she was giving him this task, and the system replied that she was doing it for the sake of the success of a user named Tony. The hero did not understand who was behind this whole system. However, the system responded that such information was not available to him. The hero looked around, not understanding what he should do, since this task had a time limit. He had about half an hour left. He walked back to his mother's room and stood near the door. When he got inside, his mother asked him where he had been for so long. Tony said he needed to make a call. Hannah said that if he was busy, he could go, and her son replied that he was fine. Then he decided to ask his mother if she remembered Uncle Hank. Hannah was surprised when her son asked her such a question, and Tony was also surprised by her reaction. His mother's tone made him feel a little strange, perhaps because his father was dead. Then he stood up and said that he would call and then return to her. The hero headed towards the exit of the ward, taking his phone out of his pocket as he went. Then he dialed Uncle Hank's number. The doctor was not expecting this call. Then, the hero decided to ask him directly if he liked his mother. The doctor did not know what to answer. He asked if something had happened to Hannah. Without waiting for an answer, he immediately jumped up from his seat and asked which hospital they were currently in. Tony replied that they were at Seoul General Hospital number 403 and then hung up. At that moment, the system appeared next to him again. It said that the hero made an excellent choice, but Tony was extremely unhappy with the way this strange thing was behaving. He asked her again what she was, but the system still didn't answer. Uncle Hank showed up at the hospital 15 minutes after the call. He ran quickly down the corridor, not paying attention to anyone, including Tony. He ran here without even taking off his hospital gown. He eventually met Hannah, their first meeting since the death of the hero's father. Soon, the system informed Tony that the quest was completed. As a reward, he received 5 points. When the hero calmed down and thought soberly, he came to the conclusion that he considered the only correct one. He looked at the system window and wondered if all this could be true. Then he asked her if his father was behind this system. The system provided him with one-sided assistance, sometimes turning into threats, but it did everything to help him. However, the system said it could not answer this question. The hero again assumed that his father was the one behind this, and that was why he did not answer directly. However, the system did not respond. And then the hero decided that he was still interested in what kind of creature it was, and therefore he would learn about it gradually. However, something else was worrying him now. He wondered what his mother and Uncle Hank were doing at the moment. When he looked through the door window, he saw that they were talking to each other. The hero did not hear the conversation, but he saw that there was a smile on his mother's face. Uncle Hank was smiling too, and the hero had never seen such a sincere smile on his face. The system again informed the hero that he had made a good choice. Soon it was 10 p.m., at which point all guests had to leave the hospital. Hank left the room and saw Tony behind the door. He assumed that the guy was eavesdropping on their conversation, but the hero said that he just came here. Then the doctor approached him and apologized for his behavior. However, the hero said that he had nothing to apologize for. Hank said that in any case he was grateful to him for his help and for calling him, and now it was time for him to go. Finally, Tony asked him again if he liked his mother. Then Hank looked away, embarrassed, saying that he didn't know how to answer that question. Tony looked down in displeasure. He expected a clearer answer. He told his uncle that he would be at the training center for the next 3 days. His aunt sometimes came to visit his mother, but he would like his uncle to come sometimes too. He paid his mother's medical bills and sent him to the company for a medical checkup. And now the hero realized that all this was not because of his friendship with his dad, but because of his mom. He couldn't understand his feelings, so he told Hank to decide for himself. One way or another, he were the only ones who could take care of Hannah. Hank said he understood what the guy meant and said he would think about it because it was not an easy decision. Tony spent the next 3 days at the training center. When he returned to the construction site, the manager announced that they were moving to a new construction site tomorrow. He asked the workers to go to bed early so that they could start work as soon as possible. Then Tony turned to him, saying that he needed to say something. Steven assumed that he wanted to take the day off again. He said that the guy had to go out. The boss took a long weekend, so there was no one to work. Then the hero said that he found a new job, and so he had to go. Steven screamed, asking how much he needed to pay him to get him out of this idea. He asked if it would be enough for him if he got $4 million a month here. Then Tony apologized for what he said earlier. He said that he had passed the final interview at Elson Group. At first, Steven couldn't believe his ears. When he realized that Tony was actually serious, his face contorted in shock. Then Tony said that he wouldn't be able to come out for his shift tomorrow. Steven was extremely surprised that he didn't even go to university. And yet he got an interview at such a big company. The hero looked away in shame, not knowing what to answer. Then Steven said that he had to work hard to avoid losing face. Tony didn't look up, saying he was truly sorry. At that moment, John and his partner approached them. John asked if it was time for them to get something to eat since Tony was leaving. Steven yelled at him because they were talking about this boy leaving, and all he could think about was food. Then one of the workers said that his wife had called him and that he needed to go home. Steven was very unhappy that the man wanted to leave early. However, the worker said that he spends all day at work and that he also wants to be at home sometimes. He said that even Tony decided to quit here. There was an awkward pause between the men. Then Steven turned to the hero again. Tony assumed he was going to start scolding him again. However, Steven told him to come with them and have dinner. He said that he was not suggesting it because he liked him. He was doing it because he felt awkward. Tony smiled. He understood that even though the leader said so, he remained himself until the very end. When the men arrived at the restaurant, Steven said that Tony would not leave until he had a good meal, because office work is not as easy as it seems at first glance. However, the hero stated that he was ready for such work. Steven countered by saying that he hadn't gone to university. It would be easy for him, and that the others would laugh at him if they knew the whole truth. Then Tony looked up at him, saying that he understood all of this. However, he also understood that he had to do it. Steven said that if he doesn't succeed in this company, he can return to them. They will always be glad to see him. There will always be a place for Tony here. The hero thanked his boss for such warm words. Then his partner cleared his throat and took something out of his pocket, saying that if he had known in advance, he would have prepared a better gift. Then he pulled an envelope out of his pocket and handed it to Tony. The guy was surprised and asked what it was. The man asked him to open the envelope and accept it without questions, like a real adult would. He said that this amount would be enough for several pairs of shoes. The hero immediately raised his hands up, saying that he could not accept such an amount, and asked the man to take the envelope back. At that moment, John took the envelope and said that in that case he would take the money. The man immediately shouted at him, telling him to give the envelope back to Tony. John was surprised by such a sharp reaction and returned the money back to the guy. Tony smiled and said he would still accept them. He was glad that even though he was gone, the men were kind to him that day, the last time he saw his former colleagues. The very next day, he joined the Elson group. The hero took a large black suitcase with him and went to the bus. He greeted the man who was directing the boarding of the bus and gave his name. The man immediately looked at his tablet to check the data. He told Tony to get on the first bus. However, he suddenly stopped the guy and asked if he was really born in 1992. However, Tony replied that this was not his year of birth. As it turned out, he was born in 1994. When the man heard this, he said that in that case he needed to get on the third bus, leave his luggage in the cargo hold, and go inside. Tony thought about the fact that apparently someone here had the same name as him. As he got on the bus, he continued to think about it. His name was not the most common, so this situation was quite surprising. Then he finally found his seat and sat down there, breathing a sigh of relief. Then the bus manager said that since everyone was seated, they were heading to the training center for new employees. Tony smiled, realizing that he was now the company's new employee. He was distracted from his thoughts by the sound of the phone, which was in his pocket. He received a message from Hank. The man asked him not to worry about his mother and to work hard. At that moment, one of the men who was sitting on the bus suddenly stood up in the middle of the aisle. He greeted everyone present, saying that his name was Marvin. He was the deputy director of the sales department of the Elson Group branch in one of the cities and was responsible for the third bus. He also thanked everyone present for their work. Everyone present on the bus also thanked him. Marvin said that he would be their supervisor for the next 4 weeks at the training center. He asked if they had decided on the type of work they would do. Everyone present on the bus began to look awkwardly at each other, not understanding what the man was talking about. Then he said that he had asked the question incorrectly and asked those who already knew which department they wanted to work in to raise their hands. As it turned out, no one present raised their hand. Marvin said that training and retraining of new employees is an important process in the company. The company monitors employees, evaluates their work, and based on the results of the training offers a position. He joined the company just after such training. He was assigned to the sales department, where he is now doing an excellent job. Then one of the employees asked what if he got a job he didn't want to do. Marvin said that first of all, they should keep their grades high, and the top 10th of the students will be given the opportunity to choose their own position. The remaining 90% will be distributed by managers, but even with the first option, there is a chance that the position will not be suitable for the employee. However, he said there was one loophole. After a year, they could apply to change their occupation. although he did not recommend this route, since requests could simply be rejected and their previous team would not accept them back. When Tony heard this, he was very surprised. He realized that from the very beginning of the company, each of its employees was being closely watched. He wondered what a troublemaker would look like if there were problems within the team. He didn't understand what to do if his health worsened and he urgently needed surgery. He was afraid that for this he would have to quit his job, when he would lose everything, and he would have to start over. Then the hero firmly decided that he must hold out to the last. Soon the buses arrived in the desired city. For Tony, all this was new. He felt a little strange, but at the same time he had a feeling that a bright future awaited him. After some time, the buses arrived at the company's training center. Marvin looked at all the workers, making sure that everyone had gotten off the buses. He said that now all employees will receive things. Tracksuits of appropriate sizes and name badges have been prepared for them. Soon everyone arrived at the center, where their luggage was checked and they were given the necessary clothes. One of the workers greeted Tony, said that he had been assigned room B13 on the 3rd floor, and asked him to change clothes and investigate the assembly area. When the hero raised his head, he saw that the floors were numbered starting from the 2nd with the letters A, B, C. He was surprised that men and women lived together. However, at that moment, one of the workers said that men were placed in rooms 1 through 25, and women in rooms 26 through 50. Tony noted that they had been very clever in dividing the workers by gender. After some time, he was already on his floor before getting ready. He needed to have time to change his clothes. Soon he found the room he needed. When he entered inside, he realized that there was one bed for 2. The hero sighed with relief. He expected that 3 more people would live in the same room with him. Then, he took out the clothes that were given to him at the entrance. It was a fairly simple tracksuit, and he wondered why they had chosen to wear that uniform for everyone. At that moment, a young man in a suit and glasses entered the room. Tony turned around and looked at who had arrived. The guy chuckled, saying that the room was quite small. Tony disagreed with him, and then introduced himself. The man scratched his head awkwardly, saying that his name was Archie. Tony noted to himself that Archie looked like a good man. He looked older, so the hero thought about whether he should bow to him. He approached him, saying that he seemed to be older than him, to which Archie replied that he was 29. Tony chuckled, saying he was 25 and hoped it wouldn't be a problem for them. He asked him where he should sleep and suggested that he take the 2nd floor. Archie said that in that case he would stay on the 1st floor and thanked the guy for his concern, because the 2nd floor was too much trouble. Tony said that it was no big deal since they would have to live together for a whole month. Then Archie was surprised that Tony got a job so early, because he was only 25 years old. He was surprised that Tony graduated from university in 3 years. Then the hero said that he received a degree in lending and banking, so he really did get an education earlier than the others. At that moment, loudspeakers throughout the building turned on, and a voice said that the interns were expected in the main building hall in 10 minutes. The man said that they had little time left. Archie chuckled, saying he felt like they were in the army. Tony agreed with him and then suggested that they go to the gym, or they would be late. After some time, the hero noted that the first day was quite good. The managers apparently want to check the attendance. More than 260 people gathered in one room to listen to the speech. The man who spoke on stage said that before they began training the company's new employees, the director of training wanted to say a few words to them. At this moment, another man came onto the stage. The man greeted him on stage and bowed, then stepped aside so he could take his place. The man in glasses leaned toward the microphone, smiled broadly, and greeted the interns. The interns greeted him back. Then the man said that it was somehow quiet here. He then shouted into the microphone, asking if this was what new employees were supposed to be like, and then greeted them again, this time very loudly. This time, the interns greeted the man as loudly as he did. The director said that until last year he was the executive director of the Elsung Group head office. His name is Philip. He was appointed to the Elsung Group Training Center earlier this year. He said their group is among the top 5 companies in South Korea, but they were at the bottom at first. The 60s were difficult years. Philip went to Japan to hone his skills, and then he asked the trainees if they knew where the first refrigerator was made in South Korea. One of the interns raised his hand and said that it was made at Elsung Group Electronics. Philip said that this was the correct answer. It took them 4 years to develop and create the first refrigerator. They went through a process of trial and error. Refrigerators were very expensive in those days, but now everyone has this household item. Tony reflected on the fact that the director of the training center's speech was built around the history of the company. In particular, he spoke about her past and future. At this point, Philippe declared that from this day on, the trainees were not just new employees, They were the entire future of Elsung Group. From the moment they entered this training center and throughout their career growth, they would be Elsung Group people, so he suggested that starting from tomorrow, they should try their best for the future of the company. Soon the interns met Marvin again. The man said that lights out starts at 10 p.m. After 10, each of the interns will be on duty on the floor in shifts. He said that the interns should elect a floor leader who would be responsible for organizing their work. Then he asked for a raise of hands for those who wanted to take on the responsibility. Tony decided that he should try to take on the role of head boy. Some other interns also raised their hands. Tony looked around and saw that besides him, several people also wanted to try themselves in the role of a headman. When he turned his head the other way, he saw that his roommate, Archie, had also raised his hand. Soon the decision was made, and after that all the interns went to their rooms. However, Tony was a little unhappy. It was his first day here, and he was already dying of boredom. He had no one to talk to since his roommate had become the floor leader and he was left all alone. As it turned out, Marvin actually chose Archie as the head boy and thanked everyone else for their efforts. He said that the duration of the headman's work is 1 week, after which they will discuss the pros and cons of his work, and this role can also be voluntarily left if a person feels that he is not coping. The intern said that everything was clear to them. Then Tony decided to leave his room and thought about what he should do. He looked around and saw that the interns were talking with their colleagues. He thought maybe he should take a shower since the rooms had no toilet, no kitchen, and no shower. There was a shared laundry room, shared shower, shared toilet, and so on. There were cameras in the corridors, so everything was under surveillance. However, the hero still decided that he should take a shower. He decided that all this was trivial. While working on a construction site, he experienced much worse conditions. Often there was nowhere to wash clothes, so they slept in them on the floor. In the dusty rooms, he ate noodles with beans, so it was not such a big problem for him. When he found the shower, he realized there weren't as many people there as he thought. The others seemed uncomfortable. Perhaps they had never been in such conditions before. But one thing was for sure, there were enough people here who were not familiar with such a life and the need to share something with others. The managers secretly watched them and evaluated each trainee. Soon after, Tony returned to his room and continued reading his books. He noticed that it was already 8:30 in the evening. At that moment, Archie entered the room. Tony did not ask him if he had finished his duties, to which the man replied that he still had things to do. Then he handed him the papers and asked him to fill them out. He said he was asked to hand out these forms to everyone, and then Tony said he would definitely fill it out, and then asked if Archie needed any help. The man waved it off, saying that he was fine, and the guy just needed to go to bed. He still had things to do, but he could handle everything himself. Tony looked at his neighbor with disbelief, but agreed with his decision. After some time, night fell. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Tony woke up from strange sounds. When he opened his eyes, he saw Archie standing in the middle of the room, so he sat up on his bed and asked if he was free now, to which Archie smiled and said that he had more work than he thought, and then asked if he had filled out the form. Tony said he filled it out as soon as he received it, and Archie was very surprised by this answer. The hero looked closely at his neighbor's face and noticed something strange. Archie seemed to be moving more slowly, and for some reason this made Tony feel uneasy. At that moment, Marvin entered their room and called Archie over with a shout. He said he had asked him to bring the forms by 10 p.m. and didn't understand what he was doing in his room now. Archie looked away awkwardly, saying that many people were sleeping now and he couldn't disturb them, so he would collect all the forms tomorrow morning. Marvin yelled at him, asking them if he really wanted to cause him trouble from day one. Then Archie bowed to him and apologized, saying that he would bring everything tomorrow by 7 a.m. Then Marvin exhaled, saying that for the first time he forgave him, and said that he must definitely come to him in the morning. When he left the room, Tony wanted to ask his neighbor if he was okay, but decided it was not worth doing. He had already asked him twice, and both times Archie had answered that he was fine. He knew that all it took was a few words from him, and then they might be able to get along. The next morning, Tony walked out of his room when suddenly someone called out to him from behind him. It was Marvin. He asked where Archie had gone, but the hero said that he didn't know because he had just woken up. Then Marvin asked to find him. He said that he would be in the small conference room at 7:30, and if Tony saw him, then he should bring Archie there. Then the hero asked the man for his number just in case. After this, the hero thought about the fact that he and Archie had not even exchanged phone numbers. He had no idea that something like this could happen. However, he quickly realized that there was no time for this at all, since Archie had been very busy yesterday. He was distracted from his thoughts by a scream somewhere nearby. The guy immediately ran towards the noise to find out what was going on. As it turned out, something was happening near room B19. One of the men living there was unhappy that Archie gave him the form at 6:30 and asked him to do it by 7, because that was impossible. He was busy with the morning procedures now, and since the man had volunteered to work as a headman, he needed to take control of everything from the very beginning. Archie bowed to him, saying that he would definitely improve, but now he needed a completed questionnaire. After that, he walked away, muttering to himself about how sorry he was. The neighbor of the man who had just yelled at Archie asked if he was being too hard on him. The man said that he should not be pitied, because such is the fate of the headman. Whoever is appointed to this role can receive 20 additional points by the end of training. He said that he had read about it in a brochure, but that was the only way to really get points. And if the class monitor couldn't handle it, he could be replaced. He then said that in any case it was not for them to judge his work, the management would deal with it. Tony thought about the fact that it would be beneficial for the company for new employees to learn how to communicate with each other from the very beginning. As a result, aggression and negativity hung in the air, and the heroes wondered what Archie thought about it. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of him. It informed him that the guy had a new task. He needed to read the brochure of the company's training center, learn all the information stored there, and be ready for anything. He also needed to lead the team as a headman. He would be able to make a good impression and earn authority. The hero was extremely surprised that the system was asking him to do such a task. Suddenly, he saw Archie in front of him, who was again asking the other interns to give him the completed questionnaire. Then he came up to him and greeted him. Archie asked him what happened. Tony said that the manager was looking for him. He was waiting in the small conference room on the second floor. He asked Archie to come there before 7:30. Archie cursed, realizing that he had 15 minutes left and he still hadn't finished his work. Tony wanted to offer him his help, but Archie had already run ahead down the corridor, saying that he could handle it alone. He then went back to knocking on the doors of other interns to get their completed forms. Archie couldn't understand if he was doing all this for some points, but he realized that if he were in his place, he wouldn't want to share them with others either. But maybe he was just uncomfortable accepting support from others. However, there is a possibility that he is so blinded by the desire to enhance his reputation that he forgets about human relationships, and there was nothing he could do about it. He needed to stop helping others and focus on himself. Then he called Marvin and said that he had found Archie and passed on his words to him. When Marvin realized that they had not yet had breakfast, he called him into the conference room and said that they would eat together since they were on the same team. After some time, Tony came to the hall where Marvin was already sitting. He was waiting for Archie with the prepared statements, but he still had not arrived. The hero took a free seat and began to read the brochure. He wondered to himself why Archie had taken on a job he couldn't handle. He should have at least done an interim report. At that moment, the headman entered the room and apologized for being late. He said that some people refused to participate, so he was late. Everyone filled out the form except 11 people. He attached a list of all those who did not do so. Then Marvin yelled at him, asking why everyone else had agreed to participate except them, and said that it was the group leader's problem. He also didn't understand how he could sum up the team's total when 11 people hadn't filled out the application, and he was extremely unhappy that Archie had failed to complete such a simple task. Archie looked down in shame, not knowing what to answer. Then Marvin said that it was late and he should go and eat. Tony was surprised that Archie simply walked away, leaving the manager who was waiting for him, and did not start eating. He was quite disappointed with this behavior on Archie's part. As it turned out, Archie noticed that Tony was also in the office, and this fact made him quite angry. So when he left the office, he slammed the door loudly behind him. After Tony read the brochure, he approached Marvin and asked if he had anything else to do since he needed to have breakfast, to which the man replied that he still needed to check the B-team questionnaires. The hero asked him if the other teams filled out these forms. Marvin said that it was mandatory, a form for new employees. Then the hero said that since he had so much work he could help him, he was sorry that such a situation happened to his team. He said that he had had a big enough dinner yesterday that he didn't need breakfast. Marvin agreed to accept the help. And then Tony said that the forms of Team A and Team C were different, and asked the man which one was a priority, to which Marvin said that it didn't matter. The problem was that more than a dozen people didn't fill out the forms, and that was ruining the whole statistic. Marvin asked him to research the wording of the team's questionnaires, and he was about to go and get those who had not yet submitted their questionnaires filled out. But at that moment, Tony stopped him. He said that they had a list that their head boy had made, so there was no need to go from room to room. It would be easier to just call everyone and let them know that they hadn't submitted the questionnaire yet. It would be much easier that way, and Marvin wouldn't have to work so hard. Sometime after this, interns began to come into the conference room with completed questionnaires. They apologized for bringing the forms in late, while Marvin watched the whole thing with a slight smirk on his face. In the end, they were able to quickly cope with this work, and all thanks to Tony's help. But the hero denied that he made any significant contribution. Moreover, the whole work was delayed precisely because of his team. However, Marvin insisted, he said that the hero even had to skip his breakfast because of this work. Tony said it was okay and pulled a protein bar out of his pocket. He also offered one to Marvin as the snack would give them both strength. He said it was a good alternative to breakfast, and he had a ton of those bars in his room. Marvin took the candy bar and said that office work is really fun. There are those who immediately fit into this life, and there are those who find it very difficult. They then walked out of the hall and up the stairs, Marvin saying that despite the number of interviews and tests that potential employees go through, this situation happens every time, although perhaps it is even for the best. This way, they were able to filter out one more person. Then he smiled again and said that he had to work in the morning, but he was not even hungry, so he and Tony decided to say goodbye. Finally, Marvin asked him to be sure to bring more of these bars with him, and if he came empty-handed, he would give him a penalty point. After this, the manager said something else to the young intern. Sometime after this, Marvin went to a presentation where he was the leader, and the interns gathered in the room to listen to what he had to say. He asked everyone to remain quiet as there was a lecture for Team B going on right now, so the trainees who were late should return to their team. Then he asked the headman about the evening. He clarified the number of people in case someone suddenly did not come. Archie said that everyone was now in place. Marvin looked at the guy with disbelief and said that in that case they should get started. He invited the interns to learn about the history of the company's origins and development, when suddenly Tony entered the room. Everyone present immediately turned their attention to the late intern. The hero awkwardly scratched his head and apologized for being late. Archie was surprised to see that his roommate actually showed up to the conference. When Marvin saw the intern, he smiled warmly at him. Then he extended his hand towards him and asked him to come closer. As Tony approached him, he turned back to the audience, saying that before they continued, he had something to say. He said that Tony would be taking over as head boy from now on and asked if anyone had any objections. The hero himself was extremely surprised by this decision, but the system informed him that he had completed the task and received a reward, 5 points, and the store's reputation was increased to 20. He had a mission to become a headman, but he didn't think that things would turn out like this. He didn't do anything, but he still felt guilty. Archie was clearly unhappy with this decision, but they would have to live in the same room, and so the hero did not know what to do. The lecture was over. Marvin asked everyone to write down their thoughts on a piece of paper about the lecture and give it to him. And the head of Team B would have to bring all the papers to the conference room before lights out. Before the interns left the room, Tony asked them to stay for a minute as he had something to say. He asked everyone to bring their notes to his room before 9:30 in the evening. He also said that he would create a group chat that every intern should join, and he would make all notifications through this chat. All the interns agreed with this, and then Tony suggested that they all have lunch and rest a little. The only one who was unhappy was Archie. Soon the hero began to create the very chat he was talking about. He made a note that this chat was only for important messages, and suggested that the interns use it only on special occasions. At that moment, Marvin entered the office where he was sitting and asked what he was doing there. Tony said that the cafeteria was crowded, so he decided to talk to the man there. He asked if it wouldn't be better if the team started eating in turns, to which Marvin replied that it was a good idea and they should think about it carefully. He also said that the interns had a lecture in the afternoon, and the lecturer really didn't like phones ringing during his classes, so if they didn't want to get penalized, Tony should warn his team to turn on silent mode. The hero said that he would definitely warn everyone and thanked the man for the tip. Marvin smiled, saying that he was doing a great job of taking care of his team members, but he shouldn't forget that he was also an intern. Then he said goodbye to the intern and went about his business. Tony smirked, thinking that he could handle this since he was pretty good at it. He soon returned to his room where he continued his work, noting to himself that with his role as a class leader, he had absolutely no time for anything else. At that moment, Archie entered the room, sat down at the table next to his neighbor, and began to look at him with displeasure. Then he suddenly asked him if he wanted to tell him something. However, when he realized that Tony was silent, he forgot his question again. The hero said that his person in this position was solely the decision of the leader, and he had nothing to do with it, so Archie had no reason to be angry with him. Then Archie suddenly jumped up from his chair and shouted, saying that he knew that he had snitched on him to the boss that morning. However, Tony said that it was not like that at all. The manager was waiting for Archie so that they could work together and then have breakfast. But his neighbor did not believe him. He could not believe that the manager would have breakfast with ordinary interns. He wanted to continue his indignation, but Tony stopped him, saying that he was not at all ready to talk about it now. He said that if Archie wants, he can take back this role, but they only say this when he calms down. After this, the hero left his room, despite all the indignation of his neighbor. Soon he came to the conference room, where Marvin and the other executives were already present. At that moment, someone knocked on the door of the office, and Marvin let the person inside. It turned out it was Archie. He said he wanted to change his room. He explained that he couldn't get along with his neighbor under the current circumstances. So Marvin asked him if Tony was really his neighbor. Archie then confirmed that Tony was indeed his roommate, and that he wanted to change rooms, or wanted Tony to do so. Marvin asked what the reason for this was the whole problem really that he became the team leader? Then Archie said that he was disappointed in the traitor. Even now, Tony came here only to lick the feet of the leader. At that moment, one of the leaders got up from his desk and came up to him, trying to calm him down. Marvin was surprised that he called Tony a traitor. Then Archie screamed, saying that stealing someone else's position is real betrayal. He dreamed of this job and tried to prove himself in the role of the headman, but Tony hung around Marvin and took this role for himself. Then the hero got up from his table and went to his neighbor, asking him to calm down and talk about this problem in private. He apologized to the managers and opened the door so that Archie could go out with him. But his neighbor had no intention of going out. He said that he was currently talking to the manager. Then Marvin stood up from his desk and asked Tony to stay. He said that Archie had actually reached out to him. He smirked, saying that in that case they really should talk. But he himself had practically nothing to say. He suggested that they start by telling Archie the reason why he was replaced. Yesterday, Marvin told me to collect the questionnaires before 10 p.m. and bring them to him. And even though Archie hadn't managed to get the job done by that time, Marvin offered him to do it all before 7 a.m., but Archie couldn't handle that either. Then the manager gave him another 30 minutes, but even that didn't help him. Archie tried to justify himself by saying that he had brought them anyway, but Marvin insisted. He said that there were those who had not submitted the forms. And even if we take into account that some people are not so easy to get to cooperate, Archie could have compiled at least minimal statistics. But instead, he only brought a list of those who did not submit the questionnaires, and such a person cannot lead a team. This was his first job as a headman, but he couldn't even cope with it. So Marvin couldn't allow someone like him to take over the position. At this point, the other executives approached him and tried to calm him down, since he had already crossed the line. But Marvin said that he would not tolerate this, since Archie did not even think about his mistakes, but blamed everything on Tony. Then he told him that while he was calling his neighbor a traitor, he was trying in every way to protect him. The day Tony shared the candy bar with Marvin, he asked for Archie to be given another chance. Marvin said that he kept asking for a chance until the very end and supported him until the very end. He also recalled a moment at a conference when he asked Archie if everyone was present in the room, to which he replied that no one was absent. However, Marvin himself knew perfectly well that Tony was not in the office at that moment. Then he yelled at Archie again, saying that if he had been honest, he would have stayed on the job. But he had screwed up, and even if he fell at his feet and begged for forgiveness, it wouldn't be enough. He said that Archie doesn't even realize what a wonderful person he shares a room with. Archie and Tony looked at the manager in shock, not knowing what to say. Then, Marvin approached Archie and asked if he still wanted to change his room, because since he had come to ask him to continue, he would listen to him. He said that the trainee had until tomorrow's lunch to pack his things as he was leaving the training center and heading home. After that, Archie and Tony left the office. The hero turned to his neighbor, saying that this is exactly what he was talking about. He should learn to listen to others. The manager needs to calm down, and therefore Archie should go to him after dinner and apologize. He said that the leader is also a human being and he just needs to cool down a bit. Then suddenly Archie stopped and apologized to his neighbor. He took a deep breath and then thanked Tony. Tony said that it was just advice from the team leader. Even though there was an age difference between them, they were all interns here, so he wanted Archie to treat him as a colleague from now on. As evening fell, he gathered his team at the entrance to the training center, apologizing for calling them so early in the afternoon. He asked them if anyone was familiar with Elsung group gymnastics. At this point, there was a deathly silence. Apparently, none of the interns heard about it. Then Tony said that as soon as he read the company brochure, he realized that this was a very important thing. Of the 1,000 points that trainees can earn during their training, 50 can only be earned in one way. Teams A, B, and C compete with each other, and those who show the best results will receive 50 points. He reminded them again that only the best interns had the opportunity to choose their own occupation. so it would be a good idea for them to practice so that their team could win. Luckily, Tony himself knows gymnastics and can record a video for them, so he asked his team to dedicate some time to it after dinner. As the team leader, he promised to strive to ensure that his team had the best. He apologized to the interns again for keeping them late and asked them to come by 9:30 and not to forget about the reports they needed to prepare. When the interns left, they started discussing the meeting with each other. They thought that they would only get 50 points if they were very lucky, but most agreed that they had chosen a great class monitor this time. When Tony heard this, he smiled warmly, mentally thanking the boys for following him. However, he suddenly realized that he had already been delayed quite a bit, and so he ran inside the building. There was only one person left standing on the street, and that was Archie. Even though he had apologized to his neighbor a few hours ago, he looked extremely unhappy again. Soon the hero came to the office where Marvin was supposed to be, but he did not see the man inside. When he peered deeper into the office, he saw that Marvin was there after all, squatting with his colleague and looking at something. Tony immediately realized that it was a broadcast amplifier, so he asked the man to let him look at it. He also gave him the sheets of paper that he was supposed to collect from his group. He said that after the last lesson, when the former class leader was late, the rest of the trainees did everything fairly quickly, but two people still hadn't turned in their forms. After a few moments, Tony said that he had it all figured out, which surprised the other men, since they had no idea what to do with the thing. Then Marvin decided to try speaking loudly and made a test message. He turned to the two who had not yet submitted their forms and asked them to bring them to the small conference room. After this, the interns, who still had not managed to submit their questionnaires, immediately ran towards the required hall. As soon as they got there, they apologized for being late and handed over their questionnaires. Tony thanked them for their cooperation and asked if they had heard the alerts, to which the boys replied in the affirmative. Marvin's colleague, Connor, asked where he found the guy, to which Marvin grinned slyly and said that he had his eye on him and was not going to give him to anyone. Then the hero asked Marvin to allow him to make one more announcement. He addressed the trainees from his team, saying that he was waiting for everyone for evening gymnastics in the training center gym. Soon evening came, and Tony went to the appointed place. Only 5 people came to the gymnastics. The hero expected that more people would hear his message on the loudspeaker, but decided to accept the number he already had. Then the interns asked how he knew about the Elsung Group Gymnastics, to which the hero replied that long before he came here, he worked at a construction site. This construction site belonged to this very company. Soon he decided to start the gymnastics. He said that he would show them first, and then they would all learn the movement together. First, they needed to warm up well so that no one would get injured. Marvin watched all this closely. He noted that he likes Tony's approach. He doesn't fuss and does everything gradually. Marlon never thought that there would be someone so capable in this training center, so he decided to tell everyone about this guy. After that, he decided to continue watching the interns work. He silently hoped that Tony would decide to go into the sales department after training, since such a specialist would be worth his weight in gold to them. Late in the evening, Tony went to the men's shower. He was very exhausted after the grueling gymnastics. He understood that the main thing was not to be greedy with the class monitor's points. He needed to ask other interns for help more often. After he took a shower, he headed to his room. However, he heard his roommate talking to his mother, who was very eager to visit him. The hero decided not to distract Archie from the conversation and simply silently left the room. As it turned out, Archie complained to his mother that he had been removed from his post as headman, which the woman was extremely unhappy about and wanted to come to the company and personally scold everyone. Tony walked out the door of his room and sat on the floor, dialing someone's number on his phone. As it turned out, he decided to call his mother and ask how her treatment was going. He then asked if Uncle Hank had come to see her, and when he realized that the man was still in his mother's room, he asked to speak to him and thanked the doctor for looking after her. When everyone had finished talking on the phone with their families, Tony returned to his room and lay down on his bed. He decided to check the chat he had created and realized that everyone in it was very pleased with the headman and his work. He thanked all the interns for their kind words and said that they should continue to work hard in the future. After this, the hero suddenly fell asleep. However, in the middle of the night, he was awakened by a strange glow. As it turned out, the system sent him a notification again. It said that the official joining date would be June 1st. Tony would start receiving a salary from tomorrow, since he got a job. Tony still couldn't believe that he was really a new employee. Then the system told him that he had a new task. He needed to improve his vision to increase his advantage. The hero was quite worried, but still decided to accept this task. The system gave him a gaze enhancement skill that he could use 10 times, but Tony didn't even understand how to use this thing. The system told him that he just needed to mentally pronounce the name of the product and the word use, and then a bottle of purple liquid suddenly flew out of the system window. The hero was extremely surprised by what was happening, but he extended his hand and took the bottle. At that moment, Archie woke up from strange sounds. He immediately got angry and yelled at Tony to let him sleep. After this, the hero fell asleep, but 5 minutes before 6 a.m., he got out of his bed and left the room. Outside the door, 2 interns who had been on duty that night were already waiting for him. He asked how the shift had gone, because he had heard that it was quite chilly here in the morning. Then he asked the guys to open the windows and go and rest, and he would take care of everything else. When it was his turn, he decided it would be better to check that there were no problems anywhere. He then decided to activate his skill, and at that moment his eyes turned purple. In the morning, there was another conference. One of the leaders said that this Friday the interns will know their midterm grades. This will affect the distribution after the training center. Many factors affect their grades, so he asked the guys to work hard. Tony decided that now was the perfect time to use his skill. He checked everything he could, and if the activity is analyzed properly, then the assessments will not be a problem. Soon after, his team gathered on the court to practice gymnastics. The woman who taught the trainees gymnastics was surprised that Team B was so good at gymnastics, especially the 6 people standing at the front. If this continues in the same spirit, then they will get extra points. She said that she would personally give top marks to these 6 because they worked so hard. Tony thanked his guys for their work, saying that they did a great job. Soon after, the hero went to the office to prepare for a test. In order to get into the department he wants, he needs perfect grades. His partners were extremely tired, but Tony continued to study endlessly. Soon after, the trainees from Group B began to come to the office and also wanted to practice with their leader. On Friday, the midterm test came. Marvin said that the trainees must show all their skills in this test. The interns who were on Team B immediately realized that the test would be very easy for them. Tony also had no problem solving the test. Soon the results of the testing were posted on one of the stands, and the trainees were a little excited. As it turned out, Tony came first. When he turned around, he saw Archie standing behind him, looking extremely depressed. Then the hero decided to find his name on the list, because this guy studied so hard, and he could not believe that he could have a bad grade. As it turned out, he was practically at the very bottom of the list. Tony had heard that he had good results, and therefore could not understand how he could be so low. However, he quickly came to the conclusion that Archie's assessment was not his problem. At that moment, the guys from his group approached him. They were proud that their leader was in first place. The interns said that they too had made it into the top 10, all thanks to their wonderful headman. But Tony said that it was all their merit, and they didn't need to thank him. He then reminded one of the interns, Josh, that it was his turn to be on duty today, so he should get a good night's sleep now. As Tony walked down the hallway, he thought that the test task prepared by the manager was quite good. He expected that he could take first place just by using the skill. However, he did not think that the result depended on public display, because it could become a problem for him. At that moment, a girl with short dark hair appeared behind Tony. She was trying to make sure that it was really Tony standing in front of her. She reflected that he had looked a little different when she was younger, but decided she would find out later. As Tony headed to his room, the system appeared in front of him again. She told him something that greatly interested the hero. When he entered the room, Archie was already sitting inside, looking extremely depressed. At first, Tony didn't pay attention to it, but he felt a strange feeling in the atmosphere. He then turned to Archie and said he was going to bed, to which his roommate asked him if he was pleased with himself. Tony didn't understand what he was asking, so Archie repeated his question. The hero looked at his neighbor with displeasure, realizing that now he would again begin to blame him for his troubles. However, Archie seemed to genuinely believe that Tony was to blame for his failures. Then the hero sighed with displeasure and said that they had agreed that they would not quarrel anymore, so he would pretend that he had not heard anything. At that moment, Archie got up from his bed and demonstratively apologized to him. He then angrily asked him if he had even had to apologize. He approached him and said that in that case he would repeat his words in a more polite manner. He said that it wasn't enough for Tony to steal his post. He also decided to grab the first place in the ranking for himself. The hero countered by saying that his grades were at the bottom. Archie had the worst score on their team, but Tony and his place had nothing to do with it. Archie said that this wouldn't have happened if he had remained a prefect, and maybe he was only at the bottom because the leaders were unhappy with him. Then he suddenly shouted, saying that the leader was blind. He turned to Tony without asking what his relationship was with him. He assumed they were friends or something, since he personally appointed him as the team leader. He then suggested that Tony simply gave him the money. The hero was so shocked by his words that he asked him to stop talking such nonsense. When Archie tried to point his finger at him again, they suddenly put out their hand and hit Archie on the arm. He asked how much longer he was going to slander him, and then added that he had nothing to do with any personal relationships or bribes, and if he was accused, he would like to see evidence. Then Archie suddenly grabbed his hand, saying that Tony had just hit him. He hunched over, pretending to be in great pain, and began screaming throughout the room. He then fell to the floor and began rolling around, talking about how much pain he was in. Tony closed his eyes in displeasure, saying that he was patient, but there was a limit to everything. Then Archie stood up and asked him again if he had just told him that he had crossed the line. He again blamed Tony for being at the bottom. The hero tried to object, saying that he had nothing to do with it. Then Archie yelled at him, telling him that he was a real freak and now he had a chance to get kicked out of here because of him. Then he suddenly started shouting, saying that he was not going to give up just like that. After that, he started screaming again, saying that Tony was beating him. Not wanting to listen to this nonsense any longer, the hero left the academic building. He sat down on one of the benches and decided to listen to music. However, he was in a very bad mood, so he soon removed the headphones and remained sitting in silence. At that moment, an unfamiliar woman in a business suit approached him and asked if he was that very Tony. The hero looked at the woman and asked who she was. The girl bared her teeth, saying that he was being rather insolent. However, the hero still did not understand what she meant. Then the girl asked him if he had bribed the leader Marvin. She asked if he was really so eager to get the position of headman. When the hero realized why she was getting at it, he immediately got up from the bench and said that he didn't know where she heard this nonsense, but he doesn't do such things. The girl then said that she had a suspicion that the director, Marvin, had rigged the test results. Tony just walked past her indifferently, saying that he understood where this situation was coming from. He assumed that this woman was related to Archie. Then the woman threatened him. She told him to be careful with his words because she could make him fly out of the training center. Tony said that it was an interim test for employees. The manager had no reason to influence the results because he was loyal to the company. Then, the girl said that something like this could harm the Elsung Group company, and they also had circumstantial evidence, and maybe it was just a hoax, but it could lead to serious consequences. She asked how she could be kind to Tony in such a situation. The guy then turned to her and said that he didn't know who she was, but he wanted her to stop attacking him. The girl said that he, like no one else, knows what an attack is. Then Tony asked what the manager had to do with it, because if he correctly understood the reason for her complaints, then he had nothing to do with it. The rigging of the results and the beating of Archie are just his sick inventions. All of this is obviously complete nonsense, for which there is not the slightest evidence. He was more than sure that they had no good reason to accuse him of this lie. Then the girl screamed at him, saying that she could easily make him fly out of the center without even saying a word. She said that Tony had himself to blame for getting involved in all this. Trying to stay honest, he was very inconsiderate. And even if this whole situation is just a rumor, no one will believe him, since everyone knows what Archie's parents are doing. A guy with no money and no experience shouldn't get involved with someone who has plenty of both, so she has every reason to blame Tony. The hero repeated, saying that he had no problem with information leakage, and the result of the midterm assessment was just an assessment of their abilities. They have no connection with the manager Marvin. They first met at the training center. And as for the bribe, he simply doesn't have the money. He barely received a diploma in credit and banking. He asked if someone with his education couldn't get better grades, and if he was just studying hard and improving his skills, why would he bribe someone? And if a woman talks so often about bribes and leaks, it turns out that only people who do this can stay in the company. In that case, he shouldn't stay here, since everyone here allows themselves to throw mud at each other. He said he would give up his dream and then walked away, saying he was tired of this conversation. The girl shouted after him not to dare leave, and then asked if he knew who she was. At that moment, a black car drove up to the training center. A woman in a long orange dress came out from there and started screaming that her son had been beaten and no one had done anything. And that unfamiliar woman immediately ran up to her. She took the woman by the arm and asked her to think about her reputation, but the woman in the dress insisted on showing her the freak who beat up her son. And she asked her subordinate to take care of her dear son. But the dark-haired woman insisted that she not shout here, because this was a training center. Tony immediately realized what was going on. The dark-haired woman glared at him. Tony paused, wondering what kind of sick family had fallen on his head. Meanwhile, Marvin was resting after an incredibly hard day's work. At that moment, Tony walked past his office and stopped because he noticed that the manager looked rather miserable. Seeing a large suitcase next to his desk, he asked if he was going somewhere. Marvin said that there was a disciplinary committee meeting coming up, and it turned out that Archie's father was a member of parliament, so he had no choice but to go home. Tony assumed it was because Marvin had given him a perfect score on the test, but the manager said that had nothing to do with it. He said it was a fair assessment of each team, and it just so happened that Tony earned the most points, which is why he came in first place. However, the hero noticed that the man's suitcase was quite large, so he had only one conclusion. Marvin said it was like trying to put out a fire with straw. No matter how hard you try, nothing will change. Sometimes things don't go the way they want them to. This bastard's father screwed everything up and they can't fix it. They'll either cut his salary or just transfer him to a smaller office. Then he suddenly burst into tears, saying that now it would not be easy for Tony and even Archie. Because of those, they had to keep a close eye on him. Marvin was upset that he had done poorly, and it pained Tony to watch him suffer. He said that a company employee must be strong-willed because they are innocent and nothing else matters. But Marvin said that their innocence does not matter to them because their opponent is the son of a member of parliament. Then he asked if Tony was up to something. The guy said he had a plan all along. He just needed to muster the courage. Then he remembered the day when one of the interns on his team, Josh, went to bed to go on duty that night. After that, the hero walked down the corridor, thinking about the test. As he approached his room, the system sent him a notification. When he turned around, he saw that the system was asking him whether he could drag others into trouble for their own good. It was quite a difficult choice for the hero, but the system said that his choice would determine the future, so he should think it over carefully. After a while, Tony and Martha went into the small conference room. The meeting was held so late because they had a problem with information leaks, as well as suspicions of bribery and even violence. Philip said that this was the first time something like this had happened since the training center was established. That same woman with glasses said that everything was as the director said, because such incidents are simply outrageous. She introduced herself as Anna, the general manager of new employee training, and decided to make a statement. She asked for the dismissal and disciplinary action against Team B's leader, Marvin. She also demanded that the new employee, Tony, who was undergoing training, be expelled and that they leave the training center. Then Archie's mother intervened, saying that she had failed to mention that her son had been abused, which was the main point of their discussion. She then leaned over to Archie and stroked his cheek, saying that no one had the right to behave like that with a child. She then turned to the directors, saying that violence was a serious matter, and if they did not make the right decision, she would make such a fuss that the whole country would know about it. Philip said that as the director of this training center, he is responsible for the well-being of all trainees, so he will listen to both sides and then analyze the evidence and make his decision. He said that if they were not satisfied with something in his judgment or had objections to the decision he had made, then the parties should speak out right now. Archie and his representatives said they had no objections. Marvin and Tony exchanged glances. They then stated that they had no objections either. Philip then read out a statement from Archie, in which he said that B-team leader Marvin had provided Tony with the assessment test questions, and he then asked if the party had any evidence. Archie said that all the staff at the training center have first-class education, but none of the B team, including him, have a perfect score, and only one person in the B team got a high score. He then pointed out, without saying anything, that he had never even gone to university and therefore could not possibly have passed the test with flying colors. Philip then said that Archie's statement was circumstantial evidence based on speculation. Archie was very unhappy with this answer. Then, Philip said that they needed to look into the second issue. Archie blamed the B-team leader, Marvin, and the intern, Tony, for the fact that the grade was given unfairly since there was some kind of relationship between them, and for the same reason, Archie was stripped of his position as team leader. The chief said he also believed the evidence presented here was only circumstantial. Archie had no choice but to agree with this. The manager was tired and sighed, realizing that there was nothing significant here either. However, even if these accusations are circumstantial, these are reasonable doubts. And then he asked if Marvin had a refutation, because otherwise he will have no choice but to accept Archie's statement. Then he turned to his colleague, and he completely agreed with him. Philip said that they had heard Archie's statement and now he wanted to hear Marvin. He asked if he had any evidence to refute his words. However, Marvin stood up and said that he had nothing to say. He had no evidence to contradict it. Philip sighed and continued to look over the statement. The manager then turned to Tony, asking if he had any evidence to contradict this. However, to the surprise of everyone present, the hero said that he had nothing. Philip asked if he should accept Archie's statement. Then Tony stood up, saying that there was someone outside who could testify to his innocence. He hoped that the manager would allow this man to enter. Archie, His mother and Anna were extremely surprised that a witness was found. Tony remembered the evening when Archie's mother first came to the training center. As they passed him, the system appeared in front of him again. She stated that Tony would not be able to escape the crisis, but he was not alone in this world. He had a close colleague. The system said that in human relationships it is customary to take and give, but such relationships are based on trust. First, you need to extend your hand, and the more trust there is, the more generous the rewards will be. So she asked Tony to ask others for help, and if these are his true friends, then they will help him. Then, the hero decided to write to the guys from his team, hoping to find someone who could help him. But he soon realized that he did not have many people who were ready to stand up for him. There were some people who were willing to help their elder, for which Tony thanked them heartily. After that, he headed forward down the corridor. At that moment, he saw Marvin sitting in the office next to the suitcase. So now, being in the debate room, he asked again if his witness could come in here to say a few words. Philip did not object and allowed the man to enter. At that moment, the door opened and the man who entered greeted everyone present. He introduced himself as Josh from Team B. He said he had proof that Tony knew the test results in advance. So Josh said that first, they would need Team B's assessment test and the OCR cards. Then Philip asked Connor to bring these cards here. Soon, test sheets and cards of 5 people appeared on the table, studying the material together with the team leader. Then Philip asked Josh to explain where the evidence was. Josh said that every night the 5 of them studied together with the head boy Tony. Unfortunately, with the exception of the head boy, all 5 of them answered one question incorrectly. Then Philip asked, in that case, shouldn't he worry even more about information leakage? Josh said that if all 5 of them had the same mistake, then their suspicions were justified, but they answered different questions incorrectly. Connor said that if that was the case, then it would seem that they had deliberately made mistakes in various matters. Josh then suggested that the executives look at another paper, a list of people who had answered 3 or fewer questions incorrectly on the assessment test. To prove their innocence, they got all the signatures. Then Philip said he would check it out. He asked if there were really that many who had 3 mistakes or less. Josh said that this is true. He thinks that the problem is not in the information leak, but in the difficulty of the test because it turned out to be too easy. The leader of Team B is less educated than everyone here, and that's true. But even with the company's difficult recruitment process, he was able to get here thanks to his talent. Even when they studied at night, he studied harder than the others. And given the low difficulty of the test, Josh didn't think that getting a perfect score was an impossible task. Philip had no choice but to agree with his words. In this case, it turned out that the head of Team B scored the maximum points on his own. Philip said it was obvious. Tony was a perfect prefect and a great intern. He tried his best every day. He is always actively involved in the life of the whole team, and the idea to prepare the material and shoot a video with gymnastics came from him. And it was this idea that brought their team a lot of extra points. Josh knew his words were just a subjective assessment based on his opinion, but he suggested that the managers sit down themselves. Was a person like Tony really not worthy of receiving the highest score? He said that the headman was talented and smart, and this was a good reason to suspect him of having a special relationship with the team leader. At that moment, the system informed Tony that he was cleared of suspicion. The other interns who had volunteered to help their headmen waited impatiently outside the door, trying to eavesdrop on what was going on inside. At that moment, Josh came out of the office. As soon as the door closed behind him, he immediately loosened his tie, saying that he thought he would die of excitement. Meanwhile, Philip said that after Archie's circumstantial evidence, Josh's words seemed more convincing to him, and Connor agreed with him. The manager said that they would accept the response of team leader Marvin and intern Tony on the issue of bribery and information leakage. He said that Marvin and Tony were declared innocent. As he said at the beginning of the objections to his decision, he will not accept. Then Archie's mother slammed her palm down on the table. She asked if they all thought her son had lied to her. She said she wasn't going to give up and could accept that this stupid guy had beaten her son and gotten the highest score. However, she wanted to clarify the issue of him hitting Archie. Marvin realized he was starting to get angry. Then he suddenly got up from the table, saying that this mother was taking too much liberty with herself. Tony tried to calm him down, but Marvin said he had something to fight for. He asked if Tony really beat Archie, to which the hero replied that this did not happen. However, he again asked the manager to sit down and calm down. Marvin had no choice but to comply and sit back at his desk. Seeing this, Archie and his mother grinned contentedly. Then Tony decided to turn to director Philip. He said he had a refutation about the violence. He remembered again that day when the system offered him a choice. She told him to turn on the voice recording function on his phone and leave it active for an hour. After that, he entered the room where Archie was sitting. As it turned out, he recorded their entire argument on a dictaphone. He brought this recording into the discussion room. It was clear from the recording that Archie had made up the story that he had been beaten. Everyone heard him screaming that Tony was beating him, but no beating took place. Marvin couldn't believe his ears. When Archie realized the situation he had gotten himself into, he gritted his teeth in anger. Anna and Archie's mother didn't know how to react to the audio recording. The director and his colleague looked extremely worried. Tony said the audio recording was 10 minutes long. Archie's mother looked at her son with displeasure, who didn't know how to behave. Tony then said that Archie's father was in Parliament and it would be very bad if the tape became public. Then he said that Archie should admit he was wrong and leave the training center, and in that case he would erase all the files. He said that Archie had made 3 false accusations against him, but even so, he wanted to give him a chance to admit his mistakes. Tony had no intention of making any absurd requests or counter-accusations and thanked everyone present for listening to him. Philip said that if he decided to determine such a punishment for him, then he allows it. Archie's mother immediately stood up from her chair and began hitting her son on the back of the head. Anna watched everything that was happening in bewilderment, realizing that she had lost. When this whole situation was over, Archie and his mother drove away in a car. At that moment, someone came out of the training center and called out to Anna. When the girl turned around, she saw Marvin. He had a sly grin on his face. He asked what just happened because he would never have thought that she could grovel in front of someone like that. He asked why the director decided to turn a blind eye to this. He assumed that Archie's mother had promised to buy her a house or a car. Then Anna said that it was all too complicated and he wouldn't understand it. But Marvin continued to mock her, saying that she probably didn't feel very good about losing to worthless people like them. Anna asked if he was trying to slander her. Then Marvin grinned and took his phone out of his pocket, turning on the audio recording. It was recorded on the day Anna met Tony in the courtyard of the training center. The girl immediately demanded that the man turn off the audio recording. Marvin asked if she was in the mood to talk now. Then Anna asked what he wanted. Marvin said that she should fulfill Tony's request and disappear from here. She had to come up with her own reason for why she decided to leave here. Anna demanded that he give her all the records and only then would she leave. Marvin said he wasn't as skilled at intrigue as she was, so he needed confidence. He suggested that she call HR herself, or he would do it himself, and only after that he would delete the audio recording. Anna swore at him. She didn't expect him to do that to her. Then the man said that in that case he had no choice but to report it to management. However, the girl suddenly stopped him. She took a phone out of her pocket and dialed someone's number. She called her boss, apologizing for disturbing him at such a late hour. She apologized and said that she was very sorry, but she would have to leave her job. After this, Marvin smirked and deleted all the audio recordings from his phone. Anna apologized to the director again and said that the reasons for her dismissal were personal. The next morning, Tony could barely open his eyes. All these proceedings completely exhausted him. However, after some time he still gathered all his strength and went to the first floor. The bus was supposed to be boarding now, and he was supposed to be leading his group. He went into the yard, saying that there were 15 minutes left before the tour of the Elsung group plant. The journey would take 1 hour and 40 minutes, so he asked everyone to go to the toilet in advance. He said that Team B should go to the third bus. At that moment, a girl with a short haircut approached him. She extended her hand to him, asking if he was the same B team leader, Tony. The hero's cheeks turned red, and he said that it really was him. The girl asked why he wouldn't shake her hand. And then Tony fussed, wiping his palms on his suit, saying that his hands were dirty, and so he wanted to wipe them first. After that, he timidly shook the girl's hand, asking who she was, since he was seeing her for the first time, to which the girl replied that her name was Samantha. She said that as of this week she was leading the C team, so Tony asked her what happened to the person who was in that position before her. Samantha said that initially they switched every week and was surprised that things were different in Team B. However, Tony said that this is not entirely true. Then the girl suddenly laughed sweetly. She asked how long he would hold her hand. Tony laughed awkwardly and let go of his hand, saying that he would remember that the girl's name was Samantha. The girl was surprised that he didn't remember her, and wondered to herself if this was really the same Tony. The hero said that the girl came in second on the midterm test, and that was amazing. Samantha then asked if he was stumbling on purpose. Tony scratched the back of his head awkwardly, saying that he was a little nervous and couldn't put 2 words together. However, Samantha apologized, saying that she had been too pushy, and added that if Tony, like her, decided to apply for the strategic planning department, they would see each other quite often, so she decided to get to know him in advance. The hero was surprised to hear about the strategic planning department. At this point, the system told him that this department is the brain of the company, determines its future and important moments. Therefore, it is considered key. The expected profit in this department can be calculated to infinity. Tony was extremely surprised that in this department, one could earn practically endless income. When Samantha saw him looking somewhere behind her, she turned around, thinking that someone was standing behind her. She then turned back to the man, saying that they had the weekend tomorrow so they could have dinner in the town near the training center. She asked if it would be too much of a burden for Tony. She said she had some ideas about developing a strategy together for studying at the training center. To get into the strategic planning department, you need to be in the top 5 in grades. She asked the man to think about it and hoped that he would be able to spare some time for her. Then she handed him a piece of paper with her phone number written on it. She said that for those who aspire to get into the best department, there is nothing wrong with exchanging information, and Tony thanked her for this. She then said that it was time to board, so she needed to take care of her team. Tony said sheepishly that he had to go too. When the girl left, he continued to look after her. Samantha turned around and said that it didn't matter what her colleagues were doing now, because their alliance was above all else. Tony smiled at her and pressed the piece of paper with her phone number to his chest. At that moment, a man looked out from behind a nearby bus, watching Tony and Samantha's conversation. As he looked after the girls, his cheeks turned red. When Tony returned to his room, he began to reflect on the fact that Samantha's intentions did not seem to be the purest. However, he did not understand why she decided to contact him. He was very worried about this whole situation. Meanwhile, Samantha went to the board where the test results were posted. She noticed something strange. Tony's name was both at the beginning and at the end of the list. She couldn't understand why a person with the same name scored different numbers of points. The only information she had was that the grandson of the Elson Group chairman, Tony, was in the training center. However, she realized that she did not have enough information and she needed to study this situation better. Still, she decided she'd learned enough and wondered if the company had pushed the chairman's grandson to the back burner. In the evening, Tony did not put on casual clothes and went to room B20. He opened the door, asking what he needed, because he had already said that he had the weekend and was not going anywhere. However, Tony still came out and went outside. Josh asked him if he was really inviting him to dinner. However, the hero remained silent, which made Josh very wary. Meanwhile, Tony was wondering what Samantha's real goal was. The girl herself said that she was too persistent, since she decided to get to know him in advance. Tony knew he should aim for the strategic planning department, but he didn't understand why Samantha had chosen him as a partner because they had finished first. He remembered her words about how their alliance would come first. The hero decided that it was too early to show that he suspected her of something. He wondered if she was trying to beat him to get ahead. However, she could also regard him as an outside observer. This girl was smart and quite impressive. All this time, Josh did not understand what was happening. He asked the headman why he was behaving so strangely. When he still didn't get an answer from him, he suddenly ran up to Tony and grabbed him by the neck, starting to laugh and asking how long he would ignore him. When the guys finally spoke to each other, Tony asked what he had been thinking about all this time. As it turned out, the headman didn't even notice that he was ignoring the guy. He said that Samantha invited him to dinner. Josh was extremely surprised because Samantha was the new head of Team C. She was the same girl who took second place in the midterm test. Tony noted that the guy was talking about her too enthusiastically. Josh suddenly hesitated and asked Tony why he was looking at him like that. Because everyone knew that this girl was called the goddess of the training center interns. As it turned out, she had been called that since the very beginning of her stay here. When Josh started praising her too much, Tony asked him to stop. Then Josh asked him when they were meeting. Tony said that they would meet at his place right now. And then thoughts began to come into Josh's head about Tony taking first place, Samantha taking second, and he taking third. Then he asked if it was all due to a strange coincidence. Tony said it was not a coincidence, but an alliance. He asked Josh if he had thought about joining the strategic planning department. Josh asked why he was asking him the question so suddenly. Was the strategic planning department the main purpose of this dinner? Then Tony said that Samantha had originally planned to meet only with him, but he didn't really want to, so he asked Josh to join. Josh is also at the top of the list, so he decided to invite him. He apologized for not telling him straight away, but Josh said it was okay. He said that this had been his goal since he entered university. Tony chuckled, realizing that he had actually just made that up.